Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, on the road to sweet a thigh, hurroo, hurroo. Well, on the road to sweet a thigh, hurroo, hurroo. Well, on the road to sweet a thigh, a stick in the hand, a drop in the eye, a doleful damsel I did cry. Johnny, I hardly knew ya.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. I am Suzanne Sherman. It is Monday, January 22nd, year of our Lord 2018, day 3 of our government shutdown. I'm not feeling much freer, but hopefully this thing will go on long enough where we'll see some actual benefit. You've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. We do have a live number if you're listening live, 717-467-1736. You can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. That's CERBERUS. We have a fan page on Facebook as well, facebook.com/CRN. My page on Facebook, facebook.com/Cowgirl Esquire. My Twitter handle is also at Cowgirl Esquire. We want to announce a new show. In addition to our lineup, we have some new talent. Justin and Michael, their show, The Other Side, will be now a part of our repertoire, and I think you're really going to like them. We had a good conversation with them over the weekend. Like-minded, very sharp guys. I'll be discussing a little bit more about additions to our network. For instance, we have the Renegade and the Rambler show. That is our flagship show where Jeff Johnson, Daniel Bailey, the founders of the network, they go live Sunday night. They had a show last night. The Paradigm Shift with Jeff Johnson aired just before me right now. We go back to back, usually Monday mornings, whenever really we can work it out, but you can always find us on YouTube or on the Radio Co. loop. And then we have some podcasts available. Shift Gold with Mike Meharry and Peter Schiff, if you want to learn about economics and purchasing gold and whether or not that's an option for you. Mike Meharry also has some of his podcasts available for your listening and educational enjoyment here. And he is the National Communications Director of the 10th Amendment Center. And you can read some of his musings or listen to them as well on our site. Bailey Report, Daniel Bailey, when his time and schedule allows, he has his. We also have Brushfires of Freedom. So we have a lot of good stuff for you to listen to. And I'm going to be getting into a discussion on the government shutdown that I'm not hearing this analysis on what little I listen to on the mainstream media. We've got each side with their poster children causes, the Democrats with the DACA and the victim children of illegal immigration, and then the conservatives, the so-called conservatives or the Republican Party, is holding the military hostage by not paying them and inciting emotions. So both sides are really trying to set the stage based on emotionalism. There are solutions to this issue, but we're not hearing those on the mainstream media. But you'll hear it from us today. So I want to thank you for tuning in. Before we get into that topic, and I do want to announce also, I will be live on K-Talk Radio tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Inside the News with Paul Jensen. I was on his show last week as well. We'll be discussing a little bit of the government shutdown and some other topics. If there's something you would like to hear on that, send me a message and I'll run it by Paul as well. But it's a great opportunity to spread our message out to a very large audience in the greater Salt Lake City area. And we're getting some positive feedback, and I'm grateful for that opportunity because it is bringing people in to listen to our network. Paul is very generous about promoting our network here on his show. So that's really some fantastic exposure. I want to start the show off by talking a little bit about prepping. We've had some incidents in the past few weeks that have really inspired me to keep discussing and keep pursuing this topic. I did hear from a listener who sent me a message who listened to my old show, The Suzanne Option, on Mike Church's The Crusade channel, and said, I really enjoyed your show. I'm glad you have a new one as well. you inspired my wife and I to start prepping. And this gentleman that sent me this was a United States Marine, and they never had thought to be prepared. So our efforts are paying off. People are listening. Another listener sent me a message saying, you know, I listened to your show and you are really changing my way of thinking. And this is something we've been trying to do back from the old network. Mark Kreslins would say on his show, Unplugged from the Matrix, that's the heart and soul of Jeff Johnson's show, The Paradigm Shift. We're trying to get people to think outside of the means, the official storyline that you hear. It's a consistent message of nationalism, very little choices, very little depth of analysis in the discussions on the mainstream media. And some of the stuff we talk about, we'll lose some people because they do not like to hear something that is in contravention to what they have been taught, particularly in what we talk about, I call the trifecta of evil and misinformation. We have the government, we have the government schools and the government education system, and the government licensed and oftentimes funded media. So show on the Paradigm Shift right before mine, you were discussing and reading some Patrick Henry. And this last week, I got my son, I homeschooled both my boys. Connor Boyack, who is a very talented guy, he's out here in Utah. He is head of the Libertas Institute. I had him on my old show, and we discussed a book of his called Passion-Driven Education, or Passion-Driven Learning. You can get that on the Libertas Institute's webpage. And that's an ebook. And it is essentially a book that empowers you to educate your children according to what they are looking for and what they are interested in, their passions. Let them pursue what their interests are, and they will learn. It is more important to be curious than it is to be force-fed knowledge of which you have no interest or desire to learn or concern for. There's a book I ordered from my younger son. I'm going to actually go through this with both of them. And I'm telling you, I would recommend this to adults. And this is a book called Lessons from a Lemonade Stand, Unconventional Guide to Government. Jeff, this is just spot on with your other show. So I think I'm going to pick this book apart a little bit more. And we're going to do a show. I'm going to get in touch with Connor and see if we can have him on there. But getting back to the prepping really quick, there are a few incidents now that have happened that really reiterate the need to be prepared. Puerto Rico. Last night, I saw an interview or a news item. It was actually, I think, on the Weather Channel. After 4 months of being without power, communities in Puerto Rico are finally getting power back. And I've talked about this before. Are you prepared? In these United States, on this continental landmass, this continental landmass is the most dangerous real estate as far as weather is concerned on the planet. Arthur T. Bradley, who was on my show before, he is the author of the national bestseller, the Disaster Preparedness Handbook for the Family. Says we have the 5 horsemen of death here, which are, I think, fire, floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, and tsunamis. And what we had in Puerto Rico, that major hurricane, those also include, again, tornadoes and floods. And oftentimes the flood damage and the water, the storm surge causes tremendous damage. So again, 4 months. How long are you prepared if you live in an area that's known to have hurricanes? How long are you prepared to go without power? You might think that 4 months is an insane amount, but you know, our power grid is also very vulnerable. So that's something you need to think about. We've had mudslides in California, loss of life there. Again, you don't have quite the warning that you would with a hurricane, but you have to think again, be situationally aware. Coyote Creek was an area near where I used to live in the San Jose Morgan Hill area, and that was a creek flowing out from the Anderson Dam. Well, with all the rain they had, this creek was overflowing and there was major flooding. People in California in this area had to be rescued. Some situational awareness, some paying attention to the news would have warned these people to get out of the area. So if you live in an area that puts you at risk, Are you aware? We know they had major rain, then they had major fires, and then this always happens. Part 3 is always the mudslides. This is how it is in California. If you live in an area like that, are you prepared to evacuate immediately? Are you prepared to evacuate if it looks like there's a mudslide risk? So these are things you need to think about. And also, this has kind of gone out of the news now, but last week, Hawaii had a missile alert. The mainstream media discussions on this missile alert was, well, how did it happen? What's going on? Was it intentional? Did somebody flip a bad switch? Was it a false flag? And my take on this was, this should be a learning experience. This should be a wake-up call to you. Doesn't matter how it happened. If this does happen, what would you do? If you're in an area like, I think out here in Utah, if there's anything at risk, it would be the NSA data center. And I quite honestly wouldn't be too upset if that thing took a hit. But be that as it may, if you live in an area that might be at risk, are you prepared for nuclear fallout? Now, Jeff, this was something that you and I had talked about, and Rick Barrett joined us last week or the week before to talk about vehicle preparedness. Is your vehicle ready to not only keep you safe? Do you have the supplies if you have damage, or if there's we just had Winter Storm Jackson come through Utah. We got pummeled. We got about 1.5 feet of snow here. This is making its way across the Great Plains, and Interstate 70 is a very treacherous place to be right now. Is your vehicle prepared for a situation like that? Is your vehicle prepared to evacuate you if you need to be evacuated, if you need to get out of there? The number one rule of survival is to get out of the way. And this brings up an interesting situation. If you're in a place like Hawaii, and if you know that a direct hit is coming, what do you do? If we're going to have a fallout situation, I'm going to have Dr. Joe Alton, also known as Dr. Bones, discuss staying safe and trying to avoid the radiation of a nuclear fallout. That'll be either at the end of this month or at the beginning of the next month. So, but if you're in a place like Hawaii and you're about to take a direct hit, what do you do? Jeff, did you ever put yourself in that situation of what these people must be going through emotionally?
I couldn't even imagine. I mean, because I saw that live going on. As far as I saw posts immediately when that was happening there. I think it was on a Saturday, and I was home. It was in the evening. I can't remember exactly. I just saw posts and people were saying, "Oh, my sister just called and saying goodbye. They just got a warning. There's a missile coming in." And it's like people were just, even on the mainland, people were obviously distraught over this whole idea. So I know I can't even imagine what that was like. But at the same time, I also was ready because I have things prepped. I have things. Matter of fact, in our little private chat, I showed you a picture. I'm starting a new project. I have a third one. This will be number 3. I do live by that rule sometimes, because one is none. So, it's I do prepare for these. I don't know that I'm actually prepared though for that type of disaster. I'm hoping you get Dr. Bones on, because I'm not quite even sure what I would do in that situation.
Yeah, he's a great interview. I had him on my other show, for an hour, and I look forward. He is an iconic figure in the preparedness community, and I'm delighted. He has a survival medicine handbook. It says if you know what's in that book, in and out, you can survive probably 90% of the medical emergencies that you would encounter in a situation where medical care is not available. So I look forward to having him back on. But I kind of thought, let's say a missile is incoming, and you're in an area like that. Panic is not your friend. We saw people videos. I thought it was a hoax, but people were actually putting their kids in the storm drains. What if some people had drowned? What if people died of heart attacks as a result of this? So regardless of how it happened, panic is not your friend. If you live in Hawaii, and you're certainly have to be aware of the geopolitical situation with North Korea, maybe this is something you should, this incident shouldn't have been the first time that you thought about this scenario. And maybe your only solution is to gather your thoughts, hopefully your family's with you, and pray. I don't know where you could go to escape it. But again, that's one of the reasons why I wouldn't live in Hawaii, but that's just me. Again, sometimes you might have to have an acceptable risk for the place you live and take that into consideration. But for heaven's sakes, don't do drastic things like put your kids in a storm drain. What if you put them in a storm drain? You can't get there. And let's say your plan succeeds and they survive and you don't. What's going to happen to these kids? How are they going to get by without you? So you need to have a better plan. If you're that concerned or that convinced that you are going to need to find a shelter for them, then for heaven's sake, build one on your property. People build these bunkers all the time. If that's your concern, do something that's not going to put your kids at risk. You know, the other thing is, I was thinking, what if people decide to take this time and settle old scores and just get completely irrational? So if this was simply a test by the government or maybe a means to incite emotions, again, we see a lot of emotions. The ploy of the government and those telling the story, spinning the tales, is to get people all fired up, heighten emotions, and take rational thought out of the picture. We're here to bring rational thought back into the picture. So that's something, you know, you really want to think about. Panic is never your friend.
Suzanne, and did you have a chance to look at that article I sent you the other day before you were supposed to do the show and I had a work issue from I believe it was it wasn't the Times, it was The Hill, about Japan?
Yes, didn't you? I think it said that Japan had a similar situation, I think a day or two after.
Saturday, it was Hawaii had this mistaken alert. On Wednesday, Japan did the exact same thing. They had the exact same mistaken alert go over their media. I found that just very, very, I mean, I have a hard time believing in coincidence. And that is too coincidental. I don't know. There had to be something more to that. And I don't know what that is, whether they were doing the same thing. Maybe this was all a test between our two governments. I have no idea, but that was just too strange to be true.
Well, you know, and some of the other things, I think people are so easily distracted by all the controversies, the chaos, the corruption, and these stories that keep us so inflamed. We lose our sense of continuity and we lose our ability to follow the dots, if you will. But when I lived in California, I told the story about when I went to the post office one day and tried to use a credit card to pay for a package to be shipped. And they said, yeah, something's wrong with the computers everywhere, and you're going to need to pay cash or else mail it on another day. So fair enough, we had cash. And then I found out what had happened was there was a large transformer, a power station on interstate or on Highway 101 just south of San Jose, between San Jose and Morgan Hill. And that was coincidentally right by the Anderson Dam where that Coyote Creek was. So what had happened was somebody used a rifle and shot up the transformers and it knocked the power out. And at the same time, within 15 minutes, I should say, that evening, and it was the middle of the night or early morning, about 3 a.m., somebody severed the fiber optic cable in Gilroy, about 20 minutes south of the station. And that disabled the 911 emergency capabilities in that area. And they never found out who did it. I think it was probably a test run to see how it would affect the area, how people would react, how the local government would act in securing the transformers and securing this area. And you know what the answer was, Jeff? There wasn't much of anything. The security never tightened. I think what they did was they just installed lights. So the place was now well lit up. But I tell you what, anybody could still drive right up to that and do the same thing. So we had some situations also. Atlanta had a major power outage. One of the major hubs, our airports, was shut down for how many hours was this, Jeff? I mean, it just caused chaos, pandemonium in the travel situation. And
I don't remember how many hours it was. It was a long time. And it really did. It had sent ripples because it affected every airport in the country.
So again, is there something more nefarious at work, or is this just a coincidence? It doesn't really matter. I think our reaction should still be the same. I think we should still be prepared. So it's just, especially with everything going on, the government shutdown and the political climate worldwide, we've got this contingency that is pushing towards more wars. And, there's always the thought too that perhaps this whole thing in Hawaii was to galvanize some support and for increasing hostilities with North Korea. So again, those are just my takes on it. And the bottom line is just be ready. There's no reason not to. And you can either get through a situation like this, and even if your only option is to just pray, don't you want to go out talking to Jesus and being calm, or do you want to be panic and stuffing your kid down a storm sewer? So that's my thoughts on those. Do you have anything you want to contribute, Jeff, before we go to a break, and then we're going to reset the table and get into the government shutdown and immigration issues?
I don't believe so. I think we pretty much covered it. I really just think that it does behoove us to, again, I don't know how many people that are listening out there. I know quite a few of them have been following you, that a lot of them do prep, but I have storage of food in a situation where power goes out, or you have a missile, say North Korea was successful in getting a missile over our landmass and set off an electromagnetic pulse and knock the grid down. I mean, it may be down for months. So you have to think ahead on these things. And that's one reason why our radio network is a little bit different than everyone else, because we do cover everything from prepping to politics. So yeah, I'm done.
And as I say all the time, I like to get the two different audiences I seem to have to come together and each address something that's not really comfortable or familiar with them. A lot of the preppers I notice aren't really interested in politics. And sometimes when I get too political, especially when it comes to our foreign policy and our wars, I will lose some people. But my philosophy remains this: if we can learn from what the traditional role of government should be, and by golly, Lessons from a Lemonade Stand by Connor Boyack. That is a great book for everybody, not just kids. If we can learn from our mistakes, and if the unthinkable happens, but not the inconceivable, and this thing finally shuts down, and this experiment in governance that we have fails, what have we learned? And if this happens, how can we survive and get through it? So that's the method to my madness here, and the message I'm trying to deliver. And I'm delighted that people are increasingly becoming more and more receptive to it. So that being said, we're going to take a quick break, and we will return with some government shutdown and immigration concepts to go over with you. So this is the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network. I'm Suzanne Sherman. Here we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. We'll be right back.
He gone and painted his entire Chevy Cavalier. Camouflage. It disappears when it pulls out of his garage.
You won't disappear when you wear Tail Gunner Apparel custom camo clothing and all natural bath and body products for women and men too. And don't forget to ask about their line of custom home products and bed scarves. Look awesome and feel even better. Tails Gunner Apparel on Facebook at Tail Gunner Apparel and at tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com. That's tailgunnerapparel.etsy.com.
Camouflage ain't nothing doesn't go with camouflage. You can't blend in the country. You can't stand out in the fashion world.
Cerberus Radio Network, protecting liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.
Walk away.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Wasatch Report. I'm Suzanne Sherman on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Jeff Johnson is joining me in the studio. As always, he is producing my show, and to that, I owe him a tremendous debt of gratitude because I could not do the show without his assistance. And thank you once again, Jeff. Jeff, in the last segment, we discussed a little bit of the need to prepare and took into as it used as examples, the situation in Puerto Rico with after 4 months, some of the communities are just getting their power back. The mudslides in California, winter storm Jackson worked its way through Utah, dumped a bunch of snow on us. I've got about 1.5 feet here. And we had the situation in Hawaii with the false missile warning. So if you haven't woken up to the idea that preparedness is simply smart, we urge you to consider these recent events. Quick reminder also, tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock Mountain Time, 9 o'clock Eastern, in the morning, I will be on K-Talk, the morning show, Inside the News with Paul Jensen. Really enjoy that show. Very like-minded, very complimentary to our thoughts here as well. So we're on day 3 of a government shutdown. And when I heard talk that this was looming, my first thought was, don't threaten me with a good time. And, Jeff, do you remember the situation in Spain where the government shut down? I think this was in 2016. And I was remembering this because we were talking about that situation on the old network. And Spain, here's an article out of Newsmax. I remembered reading this at the time, that many in Spain were happy without elected officials. And Spain, I'm going to read this article really quick by Sandy Fitzgerald. Spain hasn't had an elected national government for almost a year. Lucky them. And many of the residents are okay with that, as well they should be. We would be just fine if we got rid of most of the politicians and 3/4 of government employees, said Rafael Navarro of Madrid. As he, like others the newspaper interviewed, believed that it's better to have too little government than too much. Spain has not had elected officials now for 288 days as after 2 national elections in 6 months and a 3rd vote expected in December. Again, this was a little older. The country has not had a party winning enough seats to form a government. And in the first time in the country's 40 years since it formed a modern democracy, a caretaker government is in charge. The Spaniards have not suffered from a lack of government leaders, as budget money is still being spent on government ministries are in charge. See, that's the thing. The government still does what the government does and spends, the money of the tax chattel, also known as the taxpayers. There hasn't been a government shutdown, and services such as garbage collection, law enforcement, and public transportation haven't been disruptive. And if there is no government in place, when the national 2016 budget expires, those in charge will use the old budget as the new one. The Spain's gridlock began in October, and the country's economy was thriving, although especially through its tourism industry. Voters have already voted twice and may not feel like voting again. So the moral of the story here is Spain went a long time. I don't know what the eventual resolution was, but guess what? Everybody did just fine. So there's talk about furlough of non-essential employees. So what is a non-essential employee? I don't think it means what they think it means. To me, a non-essential employee is anybody that is employed by a government agency not authorized by the United States Constitution. Well, what does that mean? If this government agency was not created pursuant to an enumerated power, meaning a power delegated to, granted to the general government by the states, according to the Constitution, as drafted and ratified through a convention of the states and the ratification conventions, then that organization shouldn't exist. Let's go through and have a little fantasy and see what that would really mean for us. No BAFT, no Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. That sounds like a good time. How about no Department of Energy? How about no education, National Education Association? Administration. We don't need these. But what we have is each side portraying their cause. They have their poster child victims to get people riled up and not think of the facts and what could they be doing otherwise so this situation isn't so calamitous. Well, on the left, the Democrats have DACA, which is the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. That means essentially, well, if the minor kid came with the parents, we really don't want to deport them because we don't want the children to pay for the illegal acts of the parents. That's just a nice roundabout way of absolving the parents of responsibility for their criminal behavior. And I had a conversation about this before. We don't want kids to pay for the actions of their parents. When I was growing up in San Francisco in the 1970s, I had to pay for the actions of people. I have nothing to do with it. I'm going to discuss this in greater detail, I think, on another show. My parents bought a home in a neighborhood with the specific purpose of it because it was in the neighborhood where I could just walk to the neighborhood school, the little community school. It was a quaint neighborhood, and my dad was able to find a place with an office. He could have an office in the downstairs area of the home, and I could walk back and forth to school. Well, some oracles in Washington, D.C., politically appointed lawyers, connected lawyers in their Black government-issued costumes, decided that it would be in the best interest of the self-esteem of Black children in Black communities to put everybody on buses and switch everyone around. So I was supposed to get on a bus and sit for an hour and a half and go to a school across the San Francisco County area. And those kids were going to come to our schools. We ended up moving. Yeah, white flight, call us racist. When I remember the first day those buses arrived, I had never seen a police presence on the campus. What did the police know that I did not know? What did the police know? Why did they know that they had to be there? Well, the answer was revealed to me when those bus doors opened. And mind you, I was in third grade at the time, so this was elementary school. These kids came off that bus looking for a fight. This wasn't kids coming to school. This was an invasion. So I had to be subjected to this. I couldn't use the restroom anymore because I would get beaten up when I would go in there for no other reason than I was white. Did I do anything to anybody? No. We were punished. So it's fashionable to make certain kids pay for the actions of others that they had no connection with, but it is absolutely egregiously cruel to make the kids whose parents committed an illegal act to allow them to benefit because we don't want to punish them. We're very particular in who we pick apart and punish for the acts of others. On the other hand, we have the GOP holding up the military as their poster child. Well, our troops aren't getting their paychecks. I have a friend whose son is on a ship off the coast of Japan, and he's obviously squawking because I guess he's not getting paid. And I'm sorry, this is going to probably cost me a few, but if you haven't figured out by now that this government doesn't care about you as a veteran and you enlist nonetheless, well, you should have been warned by now. So the thing is, they're holding up the military. Why are they withholding military checks? Why are they withholding payment to veterans who have earned this money, when they choose instead, I would like to know, is foreign aid being cut off? Is Congress still being paid? Are we still funding all of these unconstitutional entities? All of these constitutional entities, I submit to you, are still being funded. I'm sure the NSA is still spying on us, but for some reason, we can't afford to pay the members of our military. Once again, they're being used not only as fodder in foreign wars under the auspices of protecting our freedom, but now they're being used as cannon fodder in the court of public opinion over this government shutdown. What's the real truth? Do we really need these services that the government is telling us that we really want, but don't really want to pay for? And I have a couple of articles I want to refer to. And did you want to chime in on any of that so far, Jeff?
No, you're doing great. Just keep going.
All right. So one of them is from the Mises Institute. Actually, both of these are from Mises. And one is from Ryan McMacken. And he asks, do taxpayers really want to pay for these shut down government services? And he discusses something called the Washington Monument Syndrome. And this is something we saw in the last government shutdown when the National Park Service, I think it was, they got a memo from the Obama administration that said, make it hurt. What we saw was a shutdown. They had employees, government employees during the sequestration period, take road cones out and block off the highway where Mount Rushmore is. You don't have to go in and pay to see Mount Rushmore. You can drive by the highway, pull over to pull off area and take a picture. We somehow had the funds to block off that road. I had a friend, actually it was Paul Jensen telling me, the host of Inside the News, he was threatened with arrest because they tried to stop and take a picture. So we had the National Mall was cordoned off. As we know, we have the honor flights. World War II veterans are flown there on a regular basis so they can go to the World War II Memorial and visit the other monuments and memorials in the National Mall. And they were told they couldn't do this at the same time, however, because remember, Jeff, priorities. There was money to set up blockades for all of these, the barriers to keep them from seeing these monuments. At the same time, they had an immigration rally in the very same mall that was being cut down, that was being shut down. And who was at this? Who was at this rally? Well, we had the regulars. We had Nancy Pelosi. I think we had that dog guy who's the dog whisperer. He was there. We had members of La Raza. They had the full public address systems. They had security. There was money for that. So what Ryan McMacken of Mises says, with this Washington Monument Syndrome, and this wasn't just unique also to the Obama administration and the recent shutdown. This has been going on for decades. The National Park Service, what he says, has gleefully closed the parks whenever government shutdowns have occurred, and have even threatened to close parks if Congress did not provide sufficient appropriations to please the National Park Service. The NPS knows that the closure of parks plays a helpful role. And what did I say earlier? We want to stir up emotions. He says, in angering American tourists and taxpayers who find the closure of parks, or who find themselves traveling 1,000 miles to only end up at a closed national park. According to one blogger, the NPS has even gone so far as to station armed guards with rifles and body armor at the entrance to Death Valley National Park. Nobody goes to Death Valley. I mean, you go there, I'm sure people do go, but it's absolutely empty there, but they're going to put up, I mean, we even tried when I drove through. I have a pass. I had nobody to show my pass to. There was nobody to see that I had paid my way in there. You're supposed to just do it by the honor system or have a national park pass. And when I was there and there was no government shutdown, nobody was there. Supporters of the government, going back to the article, largesse will often cite polls and studies showing the taxpayers support the expansion of this or that program. Support for a program is all well and good when support only requires a nod of one's head, but it's another matter entirely when one is asked to shell out actual money. So he points out again that this is a tactic that has been used to incite the anger, incite the emotions of people when we have these government shutdowns. And the arguments are going to not be based on rational thought. The rational thought should be, okay, we have a budget crisis here. What are we spending money on that we shouldn't be spending money on? That's what I ask you to please refer back to what's authorized. What did the states authorize the general government to perform? What is the traditional role of government? Jeff, you talked about that in your last show. It really is to be defending and preserving. It's to be the vanguard of our liberties. Is that the system we have now? As I go through actually some of the headlines of windows I had open, let me read a couple of these to you. NSA deleted surveillance data it pledged to preserve. Once again, this is going back to the issues with the spying of the Russians. Look at the stuff with Hillary Clinton. Let me see here. Also have so many of these going on. I mean, just Obama administration's blazing plot to exonerate Hillary Clinton starting to leak out, according to a former federal prosecutor. I mean, and look at the Lerner debacle with the IRS. All of those emails are lost. Is this really a government that we want to keep open? No, I hope it stays shut down indefinitely. I think if once we realize that they're spending money on things that they shouldn't be, again, refer to Article 1, Section 8. Is it authorized? Does it preserve liberty? If not, those, ladies and gentlemen, are the non-essential employees. That's the discussion we need to have. Those are the ones that need to go. So what's happening right now is we have a meltdown over, again, DACA and the children of those who have come here illegally. Lou Rockwell wrote an article back in 1996, which Mises republished on the 20th of this month. And again, he mentions the Washington Monument ploy. And what he says here is behind the scenes, this whole scenario has been orchestrated. There are very few things the federal government does that people directly benefit from. Among those are issuing passports, delivering the mail, running monuments and museums, and maintaining national parks. That's precisely why they take the hardest hit. They could orchestrate, or they could handle this shutdown in a way that would make people actually feel good and not want the government back, which is precisely why they don't defund all of these unconstitutional entities. People would actually enjoy greater freedom and say, hey, you know what? We want less of you, not more of you. So how about we fire a few million of you and have you never come back? Let's disband some of these asinine agencies that only serve to make people miserable, not preserve liberty. So Lou Rockwell, getting back to the article, says in running the Washington Monument ploy, the White House has to be careful not to cause it to backfire. For example, if the mail stopped being delivered, the public might revolt against the post office itself and fuel demands that it be privatized, which is a fantastic idea. The trick is to shut down services that affect a minority, but conspicuously, in ways that the media can dramatize, but not generate anger against the government itself. It's a tricky little dance the government has to play here to be successful in the court of public opinion. So Lou Rockwell again says what's behind it all, of course, is the desire to keep the largesse flowing, not to serve the public. Ask yourself, how is our government really serving us, this national monstrosity? How is this serving us? Lou Rockwell continues, if the feds wanted to serve the public and Congress wasn't authorizing new spending, they could divert money from services people don't need, social services for refugees and the Cuban Haitian entrants, to those they do need, passports. Even better, a truly beneficent leader would simply give away control of monuments and passport offices to private entities to run for profit. And as we know, private entities are always more efficient and productive and fair and equitable than government-run entities. And here's the irony, he continues, the services that people need most from government are the very ones that could easily be run privately. This follows by definition. If people want something, an entrepreneur, is glad to make a profit providing it. On the other hand, the services people don't need shouldn't exist at all. Case in point, this is my thoughts now, the Affordable Care Act. If this was such a good idea, forcing everybody to have health care, why? Healthcare insurance, that's completely different from healthcare itself. If mandatory healthcare insurance or universal healthcare insurance is such a great idea, don't make it mandatory. But that's the heart and soul of the liberal agenda. Our ideas are so good, we're going to ram them down your throat and force them upon you. And if you do not comply, well, guess what? We have the guns, we have the military. So Rockwell says this is the very opposite of how private business operates, something I alluded to a few moments ago. When a business has to cut costs, it looks for wastes and inefficiencies, but it is loath to cut customer services. In fact, it might improve them if doing so is likely to bring more revenue. Sticking it to the consumer would only create more loss and drive the company toward lower profitability. Well, that's exactly what our government is doing it right now. They're sticking it to the military. They're sticking it to the tourists who are trying to travel. Some people have planned and saved for years to see some of these places. Let me give you an example of how this is not of a wasteful government entity. And let me find it right here. It is about a brewery. Let me find this. I have all these windows open. It's about how breweries in Oregon are being affected. The Brewers Association has a newsletter that went out, and this was just released. It said, government shutdown, how it could impact small and independent breweries. As of January 20th, the federal government is shut down. What is government shutdown? I call it party. They say it happens when Congress has not approved a federal budget for the upcoming fiscal year. How the government shutdown could impact breweries. Jeff, can you come up with breweries under Article 1, Section 8 while I read this, please? Labels and permits. During the last government shutdown, ATF, Find Alcohol, Tobacco Trade Bureau, was shut down. Let's see if that's under there. If you could find alcohol tax trade, something like that. Shut down and did not approve labels or process permits. Until we hear otherwise, assume that this will be the case during the current shutdown. Breweries should be prepared for the labeling and permit process to take longer than estimated. So guys just trying to brew beer are being stonewalled because of this government crisis occurring thousands of miles away from them. Tax and reports of operations, if you're scheduled to pay federal excise taxes or to file a brewer's report on operations during the shutdown, you are still required to pay them. Of course you are. They can take a break from their job, but don't you dare consider taking a break from your obligation, your fealty to your God of government. Loans, small business loans, nope, you got to wait for those. So this is just an example of a wasteful government activity. If they could do away with stuff like that, guess what? They would have money to pay for the military they only pretend to care so much about. So going back to Lou Rockwell's article, the lesson of the government shutdown is not that people wanted to stay open always and forever, but that the world doesn't fall apart when Uncle Sam takes the day off. Let's give him the next century or so, see how the people on their own can restore prosperity and liberty. With no taxes to pay, there'd be plenty left over to pay even exorbitant admission fees to the Washington Monument. So, let's try this. Jeff, how long do you want this to go? I like Lou Rockwell's idea.
Oh, I'm in complete agreement. I don't need any of these government agencies. And I want to go back to something you said about alcohol. It was only a few short years after the ratification when our first president sent federal troops into Pennsylvania to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. So they took control over alcohol unconstitutionally as early as about 7 years after the ratification of the Constitution, and used federal troops to do so.
And, I actually there's some disagreement with some of my favorite historians. One of them said, well, George Washington was enforcing a federal statute. He had every right to do that. Well, to me, the threshold inquiry is always, is the federal statute constitutional? Because if it is not, according to Jefferson and Madison, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, even if this was after, the law is without effect. It is null and void. So he had no authority to enforce this because the taxes at the time were supposed to be on the states uniformly. And this clearly wasn't an example of that. And that's why I say, the ink wasn't dry on the parchment before this experiment went off the rails. That and McCulloch versus Maryland, where the Supreme Court said, look, if one state does something that affects another state, we're going to regulate it because we have the right to do so under the Commerce Clause. And I submit to you, had communications been as effective, as instantaneous as they are now, I think that we would have seen a mass exodus from this what I consider a failed experiment of this union under the Constitution. I think the states should have realized Patrick Henry was right. You discussed him in your show before mine. I smell a rat. There is a big rat. We have an infestation of DC, big, fat, stinking, bloated, flea-bitten, bubonic plague-carrying sewer rats, and they have made it across. They have had their own manifest destiny, and they are permeating the lives, infesting the lives, infecting the lives of citizens all the way over in Oregon, trying to brew beer. I've got them trying to tell me, how's your creek look? We want to manage it because of conservation and because we have a land grab in the EPA that we now control anything with water on it. We want to come down, we'll check your property. I told them to pound sand. We have another group not banging on my door, lucky for them, but sending me postcards. We want you to fill out this highly intrusive, highly personal community survey. American Community Survey. We want to know how many toilets you have, how you heat your house, who stayed in your house more than 3 nights. Have you sold any vegetables? Can you dress yourself? If you don't fill this out, we have United States statute saying that you have to. Well, according to the United States Constitution, you can know for purposes of representation in the House of Representatives how many people live here. As for the rest, you can pound sand. Well, you have to fill this out, and you have to fill it out truthfully. If you don't fill it out, we'll send you a reminder. If you don't fill it out after your reminders, we will call you. If you don't fill it out after we call you, we'll send somebody over to help you fill it out. And I'm thinking, you know what, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that's my line in the sand. That will be when I make headline news. They show up here to force me to sign that. As you know, Jeff, everything they do ultimately ends at the end of a gun. Fortunately, they never came down to do that. And I know we're not.
And I can't remember who said it, but government is force.
Yes.
That's all it is. Government is force.
And the thing is, people embrace it. I mean, out here in my little community, Summit County, they have a Facebook page, a wellness page, Summit County Health, and they're talking about 80% or whatever the percentage of women are getting mammograms. With your help, we can make that 100%. And I said, why is it the traditional role? Where is the role of government defined as providing free mammograms? Why do you get to take money out of my pocket to pay for the mammograms of somebody else? And
Suzanne,
you know what
I
their
have a
response?
question.
Yeah.
I have a question on that. What happened to my body, my choice?
Oh, no.
On one end, it's their choice, but on the other end, it's my responsibility. I don't get it.
And it's my responsibility to apparently pay for mammograms. And what they do, again, they hide behind these feel-good policies, breast cancer awareness. You see these stupid pink bows everywhere you look. You would think there was no other form of cancer. Breast cancer awareness is about making money, okay? There are many other...
I just want to just jump in here because I want to make sure that people don't out there realize I have a family. It's touched my family, breast cancer. So don't take this as a knock on breast cancer awareness because I am directly impacted. So, but it really is. I mean, if you're going to say that at one side, I have to support your right to murder a soon-to-be born child. Yet on the other end, you expect me to pay for something else. You can't have it both ways. Either it's your body or it's not your body. I can't be responsible either way.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, and again, this is nothing against breast cancer. I am very sympathetic to everybody, but I also recognize when an organization has also gone into the area of being profitable. Just like the NRA. Are we really about finding a cure? Are we really about gun rights? Or are we, look and see what the people are making the officers of these businesses? I do want to get to, and I won't be able to do it today, a discussion on, again, immigration is really what's holding this up right now, illegal immigration. And I have my article that was in the 10th Amendment Center that said immigration was, according to the Constitution, as ratified, a matter that was left to the states. The states reserved that to themselves. So we shouldn't even be having a shutdown over this issue at all. And I also want to let people know, and I'm going to get into this article a friend of mine, James Rutledge Rush, wrote a while back. It was when Trump was still the presumptive nominee. It was called Paleoconservatives Plead Donald Trump. And I did a show actually on this piece that he wrote with him. And he discusses the intention and the 1965 Immigration Act. And really what the intention seems to be of the Democrats right now, with the collusion, I would say, of the Republican Party, especially the Democrats right now, is to turn these states from red to blue. We have a few key states that are going to flip if we let DACA go through. So again, the constitutional solution to immigration was really, this was intended for the states to regulate. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the United States Constitution empowers Congress to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Naturalization is the process by which people who are here legally can become citizens. It does not mean who may enter into the nation's borders, which is immigration. Now, when I say nation, I am referring now to the traditional verbiage, which was a sovereign and independent state, going back to the Declaration of Independence, that the colonies, according to Thomas Jefferson, are and ought to be free and independent states on a par with England, with France, with Spain. So why would the states come together and form this union with a limited government, with the result being that they would lose control over who would come into their sovereign borders? Remember, the Constitution was submitted to 13 states, nations, for ratification. They were sovereign and independent. Through a compact, formed a union which was voluntary in nature. This right was never delegated, this right to regulate immigration, to the general governments by the states. The right to decide immigration policies rested with the states. And this is a fact reiterated by the 10th Amendment because it was never delegated to the general government, therefore not being prohibited to the states, it remained with the states. So think about that. Think about how far we have strayed. Think about also how unnecessary all of this hullabaloo would be if the government would abide by their constitutional constraints, if the states would insist that they abide by their constitutional constraints. Because remember, we have this three-tiered system, or the three branches of government, which were supposed to act as a check and balance upon each other. They have proven utterly incapable and unwilling to do so. The final arbiter was really with the states, not the Supreme Court. You can thank the Supreme Court, by the way, on this day for Roe versus Wade. So if you think the Supreme Court should be the final arbiter of all things good, evil, constitutional, legal, acceptable, 56 million dead babies and counting are unavailable for comment. We'll continue with this subject on the next show. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Thank Jeff Johnson for producing the show as well, welcoming the other side, new show to our network. And we'll be back very soon. And again, this was the Wasatch Report on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. God bless.